Hey guys, welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and as many of you know, I'm a colorblind painter. So how does that affect wet blending? Well, it is a little bit tricky, but it's actually not that bad. Let's talk about it. Okay guys, right before we jump into this tutorial, I just want to say that at the end there is going to be a colorblind neutral tutorial, which is me kind of generally talking about how I approach wet blending, not really thinking about the colors. And I'm hoping that those of you out there who are colorblind as well will find that more informative than maybe the first half of the tutorial. Now understand that the first half of the tutorial is me basically regurgitating information that I have absorbed from what I've learned from other miniature painters. And although I don't 100% understand all of it because of my color blindness, I do have a pretty strong understanding of most of it. Now understand that today's tutorial is going to be a combination of wet blending as well as using glazing to our advantage to kind of combine those two things together to end up with a desirable product. Let's talk about it. First and foremost, we're going to be using Stegodon Scale Green and some Moot Green. Those are the two colors that I've chosen to blend together because they blend fairly well, but they're also distinct enough that I can show off one of the downsides to using too much paint at once. So we're going to go ahead and load up some Stegodon Scale Green. Now, my personal opinion, I like to go a little bit overboard with whatever color I put on first, and then I blend in my secondary color from there. Now you'll notice I'm putting on my paints a little bit heavy, and that's because I want to show you that if you do just goop on the paint, thinking that, well, if it stays wet because I've put a lot on, it'll be good. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work out that way. You'll see here real quick that as I go ahead and blend in this Moot Green, it's going to start to streak, and no matter what I do, I will not be able to recover from that streaking. Now, there is some tips and tricks that you can do once things dry, and we'll talk about that next, but I just wanted to show you what happens if you just kind of goop paint on. Now the same with the type of brush you use. You want to use the right one for the right job. You can see here I'm using kind of an old chisel head brush. Now you're going to get streaks with this. There's no real good way around that. So if you need to use a large brush and you can't buy a new one, what you might want to do is lay down your base tone, maybe do 2 or 3 layers to get a nice solid coat, and then try to blend in your other color on top of it that way. That tends to work for me, and I'll show that example a little later on. But as you can see here, it does an okay job, but we do get streaks all the same. Now, I've gone ahead and let it dry. Then I've gone ahead and done a second coat of my Moot Green on top, and I'm coming back in with the Stegodon scale, and you can see I'm blending my darker tones into my brighter ones here, and we're just going to go back and forth until we get the smooth transition we want. The more layers in this case, the smoother that transition's going to be. Now when we work on small scale, we can use moisture to our advantage, and we won't end up with this streaking anywhere near as bad as you will on a large flat surface. This is a worst case scenario, but I just wanted to show that if you keep manipulating the paint and you keep working with it, you can get a pretty smooth transition. You just have to be patient and work with layers. Now, for those of you who've been following me for a while, I kind of talk about the trifecta of color where we use a dark tone or mid tone and our high tone. Now, in this case, our dark tone is this bright red and our mid tone is going to be an orangey red. We're going to talk about how you can quickly blend these together using wet blending and stippling combined together to create a realistic leaf texture, and then using our high tone in a dry brush to just really knock out terrain really quickly. I wanted to show you guys this because I wanted to show you how quick and simple it can be to use wet blending in certain aspects where you're not necessarily worried about getting super smooth transitions from one color to another. Now, a lot of times with wet blending, it can aid you to end up using 2 different kinds of brushes. Now, in this case, I'm using 2 similar chisel head brushes, one with my orange and one with my red on it. Now, you'll see I'll end up trading back and forth, and I don't hold them both in my hand at the same time. But I wanted to show you how I've seen some people do it. It doesn't really work for me, but it may work for you, so you may want to try it. In my case, I end up almost holding them like chopsticks and clacking the paint together, so I tend to just trade back and forth. Now, I'm not really putting these paint colors on in any rhyme or reason, and on camera they kind of look the same, but I promise you the orange and the reds are just kind of getting placed in at random intervals, and I'm just trying to knock this out as quick as I can so we can follow this up with a dry brush. So as you can see, once we let all that dry, we can come in with our high tone, which happens to be a bright yellow, and we're just going to go ahead and dry brush that all over. So you can see here we were able to do wet blending with our first two tones to just kind of get a patchy overall look. And then with our dry brush, we're able to kind of really bring out all the detail in these leaf patterns. And then we're just going to go ahead and pick out all the little twiggy bits with some brown, and it'll look great. As you can see, wet blending doesn't just have to be what we typically think, it even works with stippling. Now I want to take a second to talk about some of the ways that we can achieve a much smoother wet blend, and it's kind of a cheating method. Now this is the way that works for me. This helps me because of my color blindness, so I can use this with basically any of the color ranges that I have a difficult time seeing, because it allows me to focus on the value, meaning dark to light, and it really helps me with wet blending. Now this does require multiple layers. This is not a one and done trick, and we'll kind of combine everything together at the end with my colorblind neutral tutorial. Now the colors that I'm kind of going for here is black in the middle with red on either side along those support rods. So I've covered everything in black, and then I've put a fresh layer of black down. That's going to be what we can use for our blend. And I'm just going to go ahead and lay in some of the red, and that immediately starts to blend. Now, you could do this on either side, let it dry, and then blend your black back out from the middle. That is one way that you could do this. In my case, I'm going to elect to keep layering up red and blend it into black. And then I'm going to work on the opposite side blend, again blending out into black, and then I'm reinforcing the black and blending it out from there. Now the reason I go and do all the red first and then re-blend the black out is because black is such a stark tone. It is something that is going to absolutely take over whatever you put it on top of, which is why it's important to start the blend first, regardless of what color you're going to blend into black. It's kind of the opposite for white. White will take over whatever colors you blend it in with, and it's almost impossible to get back to a pure white. I'm just going ahead and I'm blending those layers back and forth, and I'm even using a glaze here to kind of blend in my problem spots and to really blend it all together. And this final layer here with the red and black is a glaze that I'm wet blending on top of my original wet blend to get a much smoother transition. It's important to keep in mind that as miniature artists, our skills are going to evolve over time, and just because something works for me doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work for you. As we continue to build up our skills and realize how our paint palettes work and how our various products that we use on our miniatures work, we might decide that we want to do wet blending in a certain way, whether it be how much paint we're putting on the model at once, or maybe it's using my cheater method of laying down a single layer of paint and then wet blending with water and kind of blending our colors out that way. For me, I like the method where I mix glazing and wet blending together and building up multiple thin layers, but that's what works best for my color blindness, and it may not work best for you as it is very time consuming. Now I'm going to attempt to give a bit of a colorblind neutral tutorial here, and we're going to be using our darkest tone, a mid-tone that's not much brighter than it, and then an extremely bright tone. Now in this case, this happens to be 3 different greens, going all the way down from Caliban green to Wog Flesh to Moot green. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with my darkest color. I'm going to go ahead and lay that down all over the model and get a nice even coat. Now in my case, we're going to be focusing on the bottom half of the model here, just so I can kind of do this little bit of a tutorial. Now one of the things you're going to see me doing is I'm constantly going back in with my dark tone and I'm kind of re-wetting the area down. I'm making sure that there's plenty of paint on the model. However, I'm wanting to make sure that I'm not gooping things on. I'm then going in areas where I think sunlight would be exposed to that area. I'm just going ahead and I'm laying in a little bit of that mid-tone. I'm then going back and forth using the wet blending method that I showed at the very beginning and just kind of mixing those two back and forth. I then go ahead and I take a little bit of my brightest tone, my highlight, and I'm just going to go ahead and lay it into those edges, and then with a smaller brush I'm going to go ahead and blend those in. Now it's important to make sure that we don't get too much water on our model, as it can cause things to just kind of bleed and become a bit of a mess. And there's a few times where you'll see me have that issue, but it's okay. We just kind of let the model dry a little bit, go ahead and add some of our dark tone back in, and then try to do that wet blending over again. Again, this is all about building things up through layers. This isn't about getting it right the first time. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this play out in real time just so you can kind of get a better idea of what I'm doing here. I know it's one thing for me to kind of verbally explain it, and it's another thing for you to observe it. And I know a lot of times in my tutorials I tend to go ahead and just do everything in high speed and talk over it, but I wanted you guys to really kind of get a better feel for what it is I'm doing. I really am just going back and forth between my 3 different colors, both my low tone, my mid tone, and my high tone, and really making sure I get a good blend between all of them. However, I'm also wanting to make sure that my high tone stays mostly on those raised edges and kind of acts more like an edge highlight while still blending into the rest of the colors. One thing to keep in mind when you guys go to do this on your own is that wet blending is really just a way to kind of lay down a good solid base for you to do all your other effects from. This isn't meant for you to go from 0 to 100, so don't expect you to go from a nothing product to a 100% complete product, and just kind of keep that in mind when doing this yourself. In the case of this model, I'm kind of trying to do as much of that as I can here. And I'm just simply doing that to show you what you can get, but the reality is between glazing, stippling, edge highlighting, all the other fun stuff that we do, that's what's going to sell the paint scheme on top of doing any kind of wet blending that you choose to do. Well, that's going to do it for today, guys. I'm going to go ahead and let this video play out in high speed so you guys can see me paint up the model for those of you who want to see that. But in any case, thank you guys so much for all the love and support, and thank you to everyone who has subscribed to me over on Patreon. It really means the world to me. It makes it so that I can continue to make content like this as almost a full-time job now. So thank you guys so much for all the love and support, and until next time, may your display case always be filled, and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.